All right. Greetings, everyone, and welcome. Whether you are here live or if you are watching this recording on YouTube later, welcome. It's so wonderful to have you. Thank you for taking this time out of your busy day and lives to be here. We are very excited to welcome you to both Yogic Studies and Buddhist Studies online. My name is Seth Powell. I am the founder of Yogic Studies and Buddhist Studies online and the director of Yogic Studies. And we are very pleased to welcome you to our first ever virtual language open house day. This will be an info session for our upcoming online language programs in Sanskrit, Pali, and Hindi. So today, you're going to have the chance to meet each of the faculty, to learn a bit about the respective languages, each of our instructors' approach, especially to online language learning, and to hear more about why you might like to study Sanskrit, Pali, or Hindi with us. So each teacher is going to have about 15 minutes to speak, and then we'll leave plenty of time at the end for Q&A. So please feel free to use the chat box, but I'll ask you to save your questions for the end. If you'd like, as we begin here, if you want to pop over to the chat, say hello, let us know where you're tuning in from around the world. We love seeing so many students and potential students from all over the world. Apologies as well that for some of you, this is very late at night. Some of our instructors, in fact, we know, when we schedule these things, these time zones are favorable for some, but not for all. So I see we've got people from Minneapolis, Minnesota, Seattle, Munich, of course, Wales, Laramie, Wyoming, Vancouver, Toronto, Canada, Salt Lake City, Utah, Poland, London, more from Germany, Australia. We don't always get a time favorable for Australians, but maybe because this is a little bit later in the day than most of our normal courses, we have some Australians here. Rome, Italy, thanks for staying up late. Valentina. Okay, Singapore, fantastic. France, wonderful. So truly an international group here, which is no surprise, as are all of our language courses filled with students from all over the world. I think one of the coolest things actually about studying a language online is just getting to have this community of co-learners from all over the world. So you will be making friends with people from Australia, Germany, Italy, America, so on. Okay, so before I turn it over to each of our instructors, and you'll have an opportunity to hear about each of these languages and programs, let me just say a few words generally about the structure of these courses, because structurally they're going to look very similarly and they share a lot. So this is now the third year that we will be offering our elementary Sanskrit series. Antonia, can you believe this is our third year? And with the great success, really, that this program has garnered, with more than 500 students from all over the world who have gone through our program, who have at least attempted to learn Sanskrit with us, many of them very successfully, we're proud to say, and many of whom are now on to intermediate and advanced levels of Sanskrit. We are now, based on the success really of the Sanskrit program, we're now very excited to be adding Hindi and, at Buddhist Studies Online, Pali languages as well. Outside of the university setting, I'm sure as many of you here are aware, there's very few places really where one can receive quality training in South Asian languages. For those who are deeply interested and passionate about Indian or South Asian culture, history, philosophy, spirituality, yoga traditions, Hinduism, Buddhism, and more, there's perhaps no better way to deeply immerse yourself into a culture or a tradition than by learning its language. So we are really proud to be able to offer these online courses in what we believe is an accessible, affordable, and supportive learning environment. All of our instructors are highly regarded scholars and teachers within their own fields, and in many cases have written the textbooks themselves that we will be using in these courses. So the new term for all three of these introductory level, these 101 courses in Sanskrit, Hindi, and Pali will begin on May 23rd, 2022. And the early bird enrollment is currently open. So the course structure is as follows. And you can also find all of this information on the respective websites for each of these courses. We'll post the links in the chat here in a little bit. But for each of these courses, it's a series of 3 12-week terms with about a 1-month break in between 101, 102, and 103. Each week, you will receive the modules, the material for that upcoming week, and that will include pre-recorded video lectures, assigned readings, whether it's from the textbook or a PDF, weekly assignments, which you can do on your own time and then upload and submit, as well as a quiz. You will then gather 2 times a week right here on Zoom, just like this, for 2 90-minute sessions live with your instructor and your cohort. And in these sessions, you'll be able to reinforce the material from the modules from that week, to answer questions, to go over more difficult or tricky concepts, look at further examples, participate in breakout sessions, and so on. Okay, so there's a lot of material that is already pre-recorded and prepared, and you'll be able to go through all of that according to your own schedule. And then we'll really use those live sessions to really personalize the material to answer all the questions that you may have for that week. There will be a midterm after 6 weeks at the halfway mark, and a final exam at the end of the course after 12 weeks. Students can receive an official certificate of completion with a passing grade of 60% or higher at the end of the course. So that's just a little bit general structural information that really pertains to all 3 of these languages and their courses. And with that in mind, if you have any questions about that, again, just hold those for the end. But with that in mind, I think I will now introduce and hand the Zoom mic, as it were, over to our first instructor. Dr. Antonia Ruppel is a lecturer in Sanskrit at the Institute of Indology and Tibetology at the LMU in Munich, Germany. She is the author of the textbook, The Cambridge Introduction to Sanskrit, published in 2017, and most recently, fresh off the press, an introductory Sanskrit reader, published, I saw in line 2021, but I don't know if maybe it actually ended up being 2022. She can tell us. Antonia is also the host of the Sanskrit Studies podcast, and of course, the instructor of our 100 and 200 level Sanskrit courses here at Yogic Studies. Antonia, welcome. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Seth. I'm sorry that my name here on Zoom just says A. Ruppel. I'm not quite sure why. But anyway, I'm Antonia. And as Seth just said, I teach Sanskrit for Yogic Studies. And I thought I'd begin by telling you a little story. Around 3,500-ish years ago, people who had come into the Indian subcontinent from the northwest were beginning to describe the way that they saw their world. They described the heroic deeds of the gods that they believed in. They described the nature, the world that they saw around them. They described the arrival of the dawn on her golden steeds in absolutely beautiful ways. They were talking about philosophical questions, things such as, how did the world come to be? Yeah, no biggie, just sort of your ordinary everyday philosophical question. Philosophical questions such as how should society be organized? How should we live together? What should society be like? And this collection of texts, which we call hymns, we could also call them poems. There's a variety of labels that would make sense. This collection of around 1,000 of these texts is known to us as the Rig Veda. Rig Veda is a Sanskrit word. Veda means knowledge. Rig can either mean verse, because these are texts written in verse, or it can be understood to mean praise, because many, many of these texts are not just describing the deeds of the gods, but they're actually praising these gods and then asking the gods to please repeat those heroic deeds they've done in the past for the person who's reciting them and now praying to the gods. So this collection is known as the Rig Veda, and it was composed, not written. This was all without writing. This was composed orally and passed on from generation to generation orally through memorization. This was composed around 3,500 to around 3,000 years ago. And in the centuries that followed, people were aware of the fact that these texts were actually, quite good. They had lots of interesting stuff in them, lots of important thoughts, lots of really helpful ways of thinking about things. And so people went on thinking about these early Vedic texts, the Rig Vedic hymns. They went on discussing them. They composed texts that described the background. For example, if a certain ritual is described, they would say, why is the ritual the way that it is? They would describe details. They would try and discuss, analyze, and systematize the philosophical ideas that we first find mentioned in the Rig Veda. And those texts that do all the philosophizing, the systematizing of the philosophy, you may have heard of the way we call them, namely the Upanishads. That's a text genre, that's a term that you may have heard. And people didn't just talk about the contents of these texts, but they also talked about their language. And that's for the simple reason that language over time changes. So if you were to read an English language text that was composed 500 years ago or 800 years ago, you would probably need some help understanding it, even if you're an English native speaker. And so because these texts, these foundational Vedic texts remained important for society, for culture, for all these people over many centuries, they tried to make sure that the language of these texts would remain intelligible. And they did that by composing grammars. A grammar is basically a list of all the rules that you need in order to understand a language, or if it's a living language, to also speak that language. And this tradition of grammars, this grammarian tradition, culminated in the work of someone that we know almost nothing about. We know him by the name of Panini. And this grammar of Panini was considered so superior to all the others that basically people forgot about all the older grammars. We know next to nothing about them. And they also stopped developing that tradition and just focused on getting to know this grammar of Panini, commenting on the grammar of Panini, and so on, and looking at the language through Panini's eyes. And Panini basically, we know that part of his goal was to describe the language of these earlier texts so that they remained intelligible. But at the same time, there may also have been a component of him trying to not just describe the earlier language, but perhaps also to prescribe, if you go on using this earlier language in texts and writing and whatever, if you use it yourself, then maybe his grammar was also meant to prescribe how you should use that language. We don't know whether that was the case, but what we do know is that from around a century after his death, so around 2,300 years ago, people decided that the rules of Panini's grammar were the rules of the language that we use for our literature, for all our refined, our polished, our artful texts. The language that he basically froze, whose grammar he froze in time, we call Sanskrit or classical Sanskrit. And the language of these older texts we in contrast call Vedic. But anyway, because people decided that, Panini's rules, classical Sanskrit is the way to go. If you learn the rules of classical Sanskrit, you then have access to texts that were written basically over the period of more than 2 millennia. It doesn't matter whether it's 500 years after Panini or 1,000 years or 1,500 years, people would write using the same rules. And so if you learn the rules of classical Sanskrit, you will be able to read all those texts. And you could say, well, I can always read them in translation, but translation always is interpretation, especially of carefully crafted, artful texts. And you don't want to read a text as interpreted by someone else. You don't want to read what someone else thinks a certain text means. You want to be able to read that stuff yourself. And you can if you learn Sanskrit. As I said, there's loads of texts, over a very long period of time. We have poetry, we have very long poetry, we have epics, the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, which, in addition to being really good stories, actually, also contain lots of quite well thought through reflections on questions such as, what does it mean to be a good person? What does it mean to be human? How can I be a good person in private life, in my public life? How should society work? How to avoid conflict? How not to avoid conflict? And especially the Mahabharata, which is about a big conflict between two parts of the same family, becomes ever more relevant as wars proliferate. We have drama, so we have plays, we have a lot of non-fictional texts, so we have astronomy, we have mathematics, we have archaeology, we have architecture, we have texts in biology or medicine, so Ayurveda. We have many philosophical schools, one of which is yoga, which I assume is the reason why at least some of us are here. We have texts that, well, some we call philosophical, other we call religious. There isn't a clear dividing line between the two, but anyway, some we call philosophy, others such as the earliest Buddhist texts or the foundational Hindu texts we would call religious. And so learning classical Sanskrit allows you to read all of these. Now, if you learn classical Sanskrit with us here at Yogic Studies, the way that we have ordered the Intro Sanskrit courses is the following. You have 1 year of introductory courses, and those are basically there for me to help you through all the Sanskrit grammar. So through all those rules that you need in order to understand Sanskrit words and how those words are put together to create sentences. And the main difficulty about learning Sanskrit is endings. So in English, I've got things like, I would say, I sing, but he sings. We are singing. She sang. He has sung. So there are these different forms of one and the same verb, sing, and I need to know what these different forms mean so that I can make sense of them when I encounter them in a sentence. And the thing is, Sanskrit has those same things. It has these same endings on verbs, on nouns, but it has many more than English does. So a large part of the first year will be me introducing you to these various kinds of endings, these things that you can add onto a word. And because everyone knows that's sort of the main difficulty in learning Sanskrit, we'll be doing this gently, step by step, as a group. All of us will go through this together. All of us will suffer through the more difficult bits of it together. As Seth was saying, one of the great things about yogic studies is that even though it's online, it's actually a really, really nice community. So we encourage study groups. We have a community forum where all your questions that you want to ask outside class are answered. Many people work together, so you won't be on your own with this. But anyway, so the first year, grammar. And because I know that, a year of grammar doesn't sound very appealing, at least to some, not to me, I'm sort of a hardcore grammar nerd, but I know many people come to this not just for the language, but because they want to use the language to read texts. I'm going to introduce you to as many Sanskrit texts in the original as possible from week 6 onwards in the very first term, with lots and lots of notes and help and everything so that you can understand them, but there will be original texts. But the second year If you choose to still take those courses, then basically lets you apply the knowledge that you've gathered in the first year again and again and again and again, and really, really get solid practice by reading a series of texts. And those texts I've chosen by two criteria. One, because they're just really good texts. They're really good stories, or they're entertaining, or they are thought-provoking, or they are difficult, or they're exciting, or very often they're all of these things together. And secondly, they're at the right level to be the first sort of continuous texts for you to read. I want them to always challenge you, but I want to make sure that they never overwhelm you, so that you're always encouraged by the progress you're making, without, just feeling that it's all getting too much and it's all coming down and you don't know, how to make progress, how to get any further. So gently trying to, gently pushing you, gently helping you along the way. I just said there's lots and lots of Sanskrit literature, and I didn't give you any examples. The reason is that I simply couldn't choose one. There are so many different ones for all tastes. And basically what I would recommend is, if you want to know more about the history of Sanskrit that I've just sort of outlined very, very briefly, if you want to know more about Sanskrit literature, the wide variety of texts we've got, I have a video up on YouTube that is called "What is Sanskrit and Why Should I Care?" And I'm going to put the link in the chat in just a minute. And if you're watching this later on YouTube, I'm going to put the link in the description of the video. And that was all from me. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Antonia. That was lovely. I'm sure there are questions, but we will hold for now and take those up in the Q&A. So next we will move on to Hindi, one of our new languages that we are very excited to be offering. Dr. Rajiv Ranjan is a professor of Hindi and Urdu language at Michigan State University. He is the author of the open educational resource, a Hindi textbook called Basic Hindi 1, which will be the primary textbook for this course. And he is the instructor, the new instructor of Hindi 101, as well as 102 and 103 here at Yogic Studies. Rajiv, welcome, and go ahead and unmute yourself.
Thank you, Seth. While I was listening, also, hello, everyone. As Seth introduced me, this is Rajiv. You can call me Rajiv, Raj, whatever suits you well. I was listening to Dr. Ruppel, and I was amazed and, saw my own pain learning 12 years of Sanskrit and in school, and never were able to speak it. And I still do the drilling and killing of all the Sabdrup and Dhaturup, which you have to learn in Sanskrit. So Dr. Ruppel, heartfelt, kind of appreciation for doing this and taking the language like Sanskrit heads on and contributing to the field. Talking about Hindi, so let me introduce myself. I'm from India, basically, and came to America in 2010 as a Fulbright scholar, and got an opportunity to stay here and do PhD from Hawkeye. I'm an Iowa boy from the University of Iowa, and I did my PhD in second language acquisition. Before doing the PhD program in second language acquisition, I was hardcore Chomskyan and Paninian. And so, if you understand the theoretical part of the language that Dr. Ruppel just hint to it, is very kind of amazing world. But then I asked this question to myself, so what? So let's say in English language, when you make a question, your name is Rajiv, and then you delete the Rajiv and you put what, and then you move the word what in the beginning of the sentence, then you look for your auxiliary verbs, and then you put it in the second position. And that's how you ask the question. You form a question, what is your name? Now, exhausting for us, those who did not learn English as a mother tongue, who learned English as a second language or foreign language. But in Hindi, it was easier. You just delete Rajiv, aapka naam Rajiv hai, and you delete Rajiv and you add question word kya, aapka naam kya hai. I had this theoretical knowledge, but so what? How this is going to help the world or help anything about Hindi? So I moved on to do the applied linguistics or second language acquisition, and I did my PhD and the topic of acquisition of ergative case in second language Hindi and Urdu. An ergative case in Hindi or even in Sanskrit, you have this marking ne when the sentence is completed and the verb is transitive. Now, when I want to talk a little bit about my teaching, I taught, this is my 12th year of teaching Hindi and Urdu languages. So in 12 years of teaching, I learned one thing, that I don't know anything about teaching. Every single semester I start and I'm sick. Oh my God, I have a new batch of students, because language, my philosophy is that language teaching is more or less guided by the learners community. Who is my learner and what are their needs? And I might have a pedagogy. I might have a different tools at my disposal, face to face, and the new demon that we all teachers want to be Professor Gazette now, with all the Flipgrid and Kahoot and H5P and whatnot. But we are trying to put several hats on and add more feather so that we can please and help learners community to learn. But in a nutshell, what I can tell you about my teaching is I believe in this philosophy that kind of accuracy matters, but fluency also matters, and communication. Unlike Sanskrit, Hindi, Urdu or Hindi is a living language. And if you make a statement, ye room air conditioned hai, there is a 4 word. Ye is Hindi word, room is English, air conditioned is English, and hai is Hindi. This sentence is considered a Hindi sentence, right? So the point, what I want to draw and maybe reflect on my teaching is, of course, you have to speak, but the grammar part of it is also important, because you can move on to your language proficiency at certain scale or at certain level with these kind of statement. But when you want to advance furthermore for your further studies or deeper studies of language and culture and literature, you might need a little bit more. Now, we look at the grammar book around the world, or any language grammar book. Right now, I'm not just talking about Hindi. Either they are linguistically described, so very descriptive that a language learner need not know, and are very prescriptive, like a doctor's tell, RX, and that's done. So what I want to do, I do in my classroom, I use some sort of pedagogical grammar, that I need to give you only that bit that will help you to know the language, or I can do that in 2 different ways, or generally I do that in 2 different ways. The language feature which are really complex, I try to deduce it, or if it is meaning making kind of features, then I induce it. So or sometimes I also do implicit, explicit. So I give you lots of reading and ask you what's the common thing in these sentences, and you kind of build on that. And I never tell you that what you are learning, but basically you are experiencing with the language and twisting your own mind and figuring out that how do I make a similar sort of sentences. At certain level, maybe at 101, 102, a very basic thing, that because you are totally new, and I know that as I said, language learner is the forefront. They have the agency in my class. It is you who define the class. It is you who would help me bring my, ammo, which ammo is going to fit well for this group. I have all the ammo, but which one is working well will be based on your feedback, your suggestion. But giving an example, if something is not working implicitly, I might have to do it explicitly, because that's how we learn. We learn the language that our teacher taught us in the very beginning, and we want to take home something concrete, not just the abstract idea. Hey, I spoke 1 hour of Hindi, but I can't pinpoint on one topic that we learned. You spoke 1 hour of Hindi, but you can't pinpoint it. And that could be sometimes frustrating for a few of learners, that they want to take it real content, real material. So for all that, with all those thinking and with my humble experience in language teaching and language pedagogy, This is how I train other language teachers. Other than teaching Hindi, Urdu, I teach pedagogy to several school teachers in America in our master's course in Master in Foreign Language Teaching. I do SLA theory and second language teaching method courses that I teach them. And we do a little bit of action research with students that what kind of teaching is producing what kind of results. So with those sort of basic ideas, I put together a book, which I did not kind of fight away from the traditional book very much, because at this point of time in my career, you don't want to be revolutionaries too much in academic world. So you kind of try to bring it parallel, but also put some sort of innovation. And COVID pandemic has also taught us that online teaching has to be more innovative. We all fell back when we hit the COVID and we all have to teach online. There are a hell lot of discussion about should there be a face-to-face teaching or Zoom teaching, or what teaching is better teaching, and all those things. And debate is still on. Some results shows that online teaching is better. And sometimes language classes think that no, when the students are together, it doesn't matter whether you are on face-to-face or online. My personal take is online is as good as face-to-face when students take agency, right? Because teachers are not going to change. I've been teaching. If I'm successful in my classroom face-to-face, I'm going to bring the same energy and same knowledge and same skill in the face-to-face. But because these languages that you are hopefully Hindi or Pali or Sanskrit or any other language which do not share the Roman script, right? Then it's going to be a little bit more challenging to learn the script online, which is not written in Roman script. So Devanagari script. So that's why the book that I put together has lots of inbuilt video instruction, plus lots of H5P activities, and which has a inbuilt feedback. So if typically the activity, you choose the correct answer and you, woohoo, great job, wonderful. And if you click the wrong answer, then it says incorrect. But then in my book, you will see that when you choose the incorrect, it will explain why this is incorrect. So that's the opportunity for you to learn that if I made a mistake, why this is a mistake, right? So this is a learning opportunity rather than throwing like, oh, you are wrong, oh my God, right? So that's my approach, that every opportunity is a learning opportunity. Mistakes is a learning opportunity, because language learning itself is an amazing journey that I have been through. Right now, I'm writing my Urdu book, but I'm also on Persian textbook and Vietnamese and Uzbek and so many other languages that my wonderful language teachers, and I guide them to write their textbook and guide them pedagogically and technologically. Last bit I want to just add on about my goal for my class, and I hope this goal would be shared by all my students in the class, that first 101 and 102 and 103, I have this, I'm kind of American academia trained, so I cannot just leave that baggage behind or anything. So in what I want to believe, that in 2 semesters, you would not be a novice person, you would be at least intermediate kind of made in 2 semesters. But it's a inverted cone. So when you put the water in the cone, the bottom one, which is narrow, get filled very very fast. But then as you go on in your language proficiency, it takes more time to reach the advanced level, right? So, and in a very nutshell, if the novice is a kind of a parrot, that you know the language, you know the sentence that your teacher has used in a classroom and you wrote, memorize it. And like, aapka naam kya hai? That means what is your name? And you learn it, you have no idea what the sentence structure is, why this is aapka, why it is naam, and what is kya and what is hai. But the response is mera naam, and you add your name and hai. And then you wrote, memorize it. So that's the novice level. Your response would be at the word or phrase level, not at the complete sentence level. But by the 102, you would have the ability to form a simple sentences, to start a conversation, to ask simple questions related to yourself, right? I and you. And then in 102, if you continue to 103, you would have a solid intermediate mid, and intermediate level is survivor level. what does that mean? So if I take my student and throw that person in the bazaar of New Delhi and ask them to come back to hotel room or wherever we are staying, that person can ask question and ask direction and understand the direction and somehow manage to come back home or come back to the hotel. That's a survivor mode. So for at the 101, 102, 103, if you are taking Hindi, my approach and my goal is to make you not just aware of a grammar or what is about the language, but how the language is used and how you will use the language. And I will make you a survivor in Hindi. If you take to 200 level, and as I said, moving on from intermediate level to advanced level, you need to watch lots of Bollywood movie. You need to have a partners in crime next to you, learning this language, and then you move on, right? So, and I'll not teach you for any test or anything, but you will have to kind of see where you land. Can you, do you feel comfortable asking questions or survival mode, or are you able to describe something more? Again, different languages will have, different learners have a different kind of scale of learning, but there's no judgment pass. Each and every student are learning with their own pace, and I am always there to handhold and tell you how you can move on. And if you need any help from me, I'm always available, right? Because language teaching and pedagogy and research on language, and language is my life. So I once again want to say thanks to Seth in person and Yogic Study as an institution for giving me this platform and talking to this wonderful group of people that I'm looking forward to work with. Thank you, Seth.
Dhanyavad, Rajiv ji. Hopefully, maybe even in the first year, we can watch some Bollywood films together. I'm sure you'll find a way to work that in class. I know for me, definitely one of the highlights of studying Hindi at Harvard was watching Amar Akbar Anthony or Sholay, and actually being able to understand and recognize, some of the sentences, some of the forms without subtitles. It's a very gratifying thing, right? Or the same thing if you're studying Sanskrit and maybe you have a yoga background and you have all of these vocabulary words already built in, and then all of a sudden you sort of see them in the wild, in Devanagari, in a different script or alphabet for the first time. I remember the first time I saw the word yoga written in Devanagari, this word that I had been so familiar with, and yet I hadn't seen it before until now, So thank you so much, Rajiv and Antonia. One thing I just want to emphasize to everyone, if you're listening to this and thinking about, is this for me? This sounds scary or too much. I just want to emphasize that all of these 101 courses, we really are going to start at ground zero. They assume no background knowledge, no prior study or training in this language. If you have some background already, that will be great, and that will help you. Depending on how much background you have, it might only help you for the first week or two. I'm not so sure. These courses, just as we have people from all over the world, from all walks of life and stages of life, people will have different backgrounds, but again, there's no assumed knowledge necessary. We will really be starting from ground zero. Okay, so I see there's some comments and questions and things starting to come in. Lagan all the way, says Dr. Kate Hartmann on the Bollywood note. We're going to hold off still for now on most of the comments and questions. Again, we'll have plenty of time here shortly to get to those. With Sanskrit and Hindi at Yogic Studies now kind of behind us, let's switch gears here a little bit, and we'll talk about Pali at Buddhist Studies online. And to do that, I'm going to hand things over to Kate. Let me first give her an introduction. So Dr. Kate Hartmann is Assistant Professor of Buddhist Studies in the Department of Philosophy and Religious Studies at the University of Wyoming. She received her PhD from Harvard University in 2020 with a fantastic dissertation on Tibetan Buddhist pilgrimage traditions. Kate, as you will well know, is the host of the Buddhist Studies podcast, and she is the director of Buddhist Studies Online. Kate, over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Seth. To those of you who are here more familiar with yogic studies, we over at Buddhist Studies Online are the sort of sister site to yogic studies. We're focused on Buddhist history, philosophy, and practices. We just got started last year. In fact, April 5th was our 1-year anniversary. And so we're very fortunate that on this 1-year anniversary, we get to launch language courses. As Seth has said, when you encounter a tradition, that's wonderful. And when you get to encounter it through the original languages that the texts are written in, it really just deepens your experience. The things that you thought were true, you actually have to slow down and puzzle over. You get to put together things in a new way, and you just get to kind of experience things in this really direct fashion. And so I would encourage anyone who has the opportunity to learn, whether it's a language that we offer currently or whether you're interested in learning other languages, you can reach out to me and I'll help connect you with resources. But really take the opportunity to do so. I have personally found it so rewarding, and part of the reason I wanted to do this is that we can share this with others. Pali in particular is a language that even at the university level can be really, really difficult. I was speaking with some students at Union Theological Seminary in New York City who, whether they get offered Pali or not is dependent upon the number of students. And so we're really excited to offer this full-year Pali course with Aleix Ruiz-Falqués. And so I'll introduce our wonderful Pali instructor right now. Aleix Ruiz-Falqués is head of the Department of Pali and Languages at Shan State Buddhist University in Myanmar. He's also a Kensei postdoctoral research fellow in Buddhist studies at Hebrew University in Jerusalem, where he's also a research fellow. He got his PhD at the University of Cambridge and is an expert in Pali grammar. So I will hand it over to Aleix. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Kate and Seth, for this introduction. I'm very excited to be here. Thank you very much to everyone for coming and for your interest in learning the classical languages or modern languages of India related to yoga and Buddhism. So there's not much to add in terms of methodology to what has been said, but I would like to begin by introducing myself a little bit, and that will have to do also with the previous teacher's presentation, because although I'm teaching Pali, my journey started with Sanskrit and later on a little bit of Hindi, and then I landed in Pali, but that was something a little bit unexpected. So I'm coming from classics. Actually, I graduated in classics in Barcelona. And when I was doing classics, I just realized that I wanted to learn Sanskrit. And it was almost all of a sudden, after taking an introduction to Sanskrit and wanting to learn more about the ancient traditions of India, especially the literature, I was mostly interested in kavya, that is poetry or ornate poetry. So I was really fascinated with that. Then one day I came back home and I just told my parents that after my BA, I would go to India and learn Sanskrit in India. So after my BA, what I had to do was to save some money. And then finally I could buy the ticket and get ready. And I went to Pune, to the city of Pune. And I managed to enroll in the master's program of Sanskrit. And while I was doing that, because I was a little bit naive or a little bit ignorant, perhaps, of the situation in India, I thought that Hindi would be the medium language everywhere. So I did a little bit of self-taught Hindi. So that was my preparation before I actually started my Sanskrit course, my Sanskrit master's program in Pune. But in that program, we had to choose an optional subject, and we could choose between Prakrit, Pali, or teaching Sanskrit methodology. And due to kind of personal reasons or biographical reasons, I was living in the student hostel, in the international student hostel, where there were many Buddhist monks from all the different traditions. And at the beginning, I made a friendship, especially with some Burmese monks, who were also in the Sanskrit department and Pali department, and also with a Korean monk. So that coincided with my moment of choosing this extra subject. And that's when I decided to take Pali, because I knew that this was one of the classical languages of Buddhism. So I took Pali, and then we started reading the Milinda Panya. I don't know if you know about this book. This is a very interesting, fascinating dialogue between an Indian Buddhist monk and a Greek king of the dynasty of Alexander the Great. And so after that, it was kind of becoming clear to me that this was the reason why I went to India, actually, even though I didn't know that. And I got into Pali very much. I never formally studied Pali because I was doing Sanskrit. If you know Sanskrit, and I'm saying that for those of you who have taken Sanskrit courses, Pali is going to be quite easy. But basically, so after finishing my MA, then I tried to continue with Pali. I went back to Europe. I ended up doing a PhD in Pali in Cambridge. I tried to focus on the traditions of Pali learning in the Theravada world. So that means I try to study not only the ancient classical tradition that we read in the Tipitaka, in the words of the Buddha, but also how it had been transmitted through the centuries. So my focus was on medieval Burma, medieval Myanmar, but that is because this is a way of accessing the ancient Buddhist literature of India. So after my PhD, then I worked in several places, and I have been teaching in different places and doing research in Asia and also in Europe. And at the moment, I'm officially teaching in Burma, in Myanmar, at the Shan State Buddhist University, and soon I hope I will be teaching here. So I understand that many people already know what Pali is, but basically Pali is the name of a language. But here I just would like to introduce a little bit what do we mean by Pali. And actually, when we say the Pali language, that is the language of a corpus, of a collection of texts. And the core of this text is the Tipitaka, or in Sanskrit it's called Tripitaka, which basically contains the teachings of the Buddha, or it's the basic collection of the Buddhist scriptures, if you want to call it in that way. Now we have, of course, several Buddhist textual traditions which have a kind of Tripitaka. So there is the Buddhist scriptures in Tibetan, and you also have a very voluminous collection of Buddhist scriptures in Chinese that are very ancient, for sure. But the only extant surviving complete collection of the teachings of the Buddha in an Indian language, in an ancient Indian language, that means a language which was what the Buddha spoke or something very close, that the only collection that we preserve in an Indian language of the Buddha's teachings is the Pali Tipitaka. Of course, we have other texts in Sanskrit, perhaps, or in other regional languages, but the only full collection of the teachings in an Indian language, the teachings of the Buddha, is the Pali Tipitaka. And this was preserved actually for some time orally in India, then it was written down. Then it has been preserved mostly outside India, if you consider Sri Lanka and Southeast Asia outside India properly, but it's the area of influence of Buddhism. So the Tipitaka is the main corpus of text in Pali, but there is more. Actually, most of the Pali texts are not in the Tipitaka. The Tipitaka is the beginning, it's the mula, it's the root. Then there are many commentaries which contain all sorts of literature, stories, philosophy, devotional texts, histories, lineages, etc. So what we are going to teach in this particular course, now talking about the Pali course, the elementary Pali, as it has been said before, this is Pali for beginners. This is the beginning of Pali. So if someone has no idea even of any Indian language, that will be fine. In the same way that Rajiv was saying, the idea is that We are going to teach things that are useful immediately. We don't want to go into too much theory, but obviously we'll have to teach some theory, but just the basic. And then two things that are important in my own approach. One thing is that we were going to focus on the language of the Nikayas. That means of all the collections of the Tipitaka, which is the ancient corpus of texts, we will leave aside all the matters which have to do with monastic discipline. Most of us, I don't see any monastic here, so I guess this is for monastics mostly. And we're not going to touch the Abhidhamma, which is more philosophical, more intricate. Some even call that literature something that is late. So we are going to focus on the discourses of the Buddha, which are very rich. Even in those discourses, you will find different genres of literature. And that will be the goal. So we're going to learn how to read the discourses of the Buddha in Pali, in this Indian language. And the method, or what I try to do, at least in the first blog, in 101, is to, but then elaborate on that in 102 and 103, is to try to focus on the structure of the sentence in Pali, to try to know how a Pali sentence works. Because there are many features in the Pali sentence that are more or less fixed or standard. So if we know that, we can predict things. It's not hard science, it's not mathematics, but it works pretty well in terms of statistics. So if we know more or less what is the order of the sentence and how to split it, how to divide it into smaller parts that are easy to analyze, then things become much easier. And I have done that with many groups of students from different places, and it seems to work, even with monastic students who had, this very long training in the monastery. When they try this other approach, things are a little bit easier. So this is the main goal, to learn how to analyze a Pali sentence. That means sometimes even when we don't have a dictionary or when we don't have other tools, at least we know how to navigate a little bit or with the text. Then the nature of the Pali text is such that this is not an open literature like in Sanskrit. You have basically always Buddhist texts, mostly talking about the same things. So we are going to try to learn these things that come all the time in the literature. And we obviously will have to discuss some ideas and some concepts. This is not purely language, because if we just do the language, we will not understand anything. And the idea at the end of the course is that the student will know how to read Pali with the help of a dictionary and a reference grammar. So I'm going to provide all the materials like glossaries, all the teaching materials, games, etc., exercises. We're going to be meeting every week. But my sort of obsession is that today you have online plenty of resources for learning Pali and for actually reading Pali. There are some websites in which you can just click on a word and it will tell you, okay, this is accusative singular of that word and it means such and so and so. The point is that many students use that as a shortcut, but they still don't understand why it means what it means. So what I'm trying to teach is the why and how it means what it means. Otherwise, for the rest, we have dictionaries, we have resources. I'm going to share all this information with you, all these resources. But what needs to be learned is the skill of how to use all these resources. And this is what we are going to do, basically. If I would have to recommend the course, I think this is not just something that it can be wonderful, to access the teachings of the Buddha to any person interested in Buddhism or in Indian philosophy. I think there is no need to vindicate the Buddha at this stage. He is one of the greatest sages in history. But the thing with Pali is not only that it's interesting to Buddhists, it's also interesting if you want to have a broader perspective on classical India or ancient India beyond the area or the domain of Brahmanism and Sanskrit. As you know, Sanskrit is a sacred language. Pali, in a way, is a sacred language, but it belongs to the sphere of the Prakrit languages that are closer to popular languages. It's a bit closer maybe to the daily life, to the social life. You begin to see in the Pali scriptures situations where you more or less can breathe the daily life of ancient India. So it's good for the historian, It's good for the historian of philosophy or for the philosopher. There are plenty of ideas, not only Buddhist ideas, but there are many dialogues with other teachers. And I think for those who know Sanskrit, it's also a very good complement to expand a little bit the knowledge on classical Indian languages. I will leave it here, and for the rest, I will be very happy to answer questions if you have some. Thank you very much.
All right. Well, thank you so much to all of our fantastic instructors. I want to take all of these courses myself. I'm sure some of you might be thinking, oh, I wish these weren't all at the same time. I might actually like to do Pali and Hindi or Sanskrit and Hindi or something like that. Well, hopefully we'll get to continue to offer these year after year if our instructors are so kind to return. But do pace yourself. Before we jump over to Q&A, and please now feel free to start putting some questions over into the chat or any comments that you might have. I thought I would just take just a moment and just share my screen and just take you over to the website. This is at yogicstudies.com/language. This is just one place where you can access all 3 of these courses. You can also go to BuddhistStudiesOnline.com to access directly the Pali. But here you'll find all of the information really that we've shared today, perhaps in a little bit more details. But I wanted to just point out that enrollment is open for all 3 of these courses, and that we currently have an early bird enrollment special going on right now, where you can receive 20% off the tuition price. And so that is going to be valid through Friday, April 22nd. So apologies if you're watching this in the future and this will no longer apply to you. But for those of you who are here live or you're watching the recording before this ends, you might like to take advantage of that. Also, just to point out, yes, here we're on the Sanskrit page, but this is the same for all 3 of our language courses. Same pricing and tiered structure. Let me just point out that there are a few different payment options. There's some flexibility here. You can sign up for the 101 course with 1 payment, or you can do 3 monthly payments. If you know you want to learn Sanskrit or Hindi or Pali and you want to just take the leap now, if you sign up for the bundle, you can save quite a bit if you sign up for all 3 courses at once. So there you go. You have 3 options to sign up. Also, I just want to highlight, this is unique actually to our Sanskrit program, that 5% of all the course proceeds that we receive for our Sanskrit enrollment will be donated to an organization called Shanti Bhavan's Children's Project. As you can see, here is an organization based in Bangalore in India that operates K through 12 residential school and provides incredible educational opportunities for impoverished and underprivileged youth in India. And we're really happy to be able to support Shanti Bhavan in some small way. So study Sanskrit with us, and you can also support children's education in India. One little way of being able to give back to the country and culture of where this language originates from. Okay, so that's it from me at this time, but we would love to hear from those of you who are here with us live. You can put a question into the chat. You can also, if you would like to actually just speak and ask me or one of the instructors or Kate a question directly, you can use the Zoom digital hand raise feature. And I can call on you like I'm about to do right now for Vishal. Vishal, good to see you, my friend. Go ahead and unmute yourself if you like.
Hi, thanks to Seth and Kate for hosting today. So I've got a question for all 3 panelists initially, and then one for Dr. Ruppel specifically. Is there a commonality or symmetry between all three languages? For instance, if I learn Sanskrit now, would that help me later on in terms of the Hindi and the Pali? Already, I think all three of you have come from the Sanskrit branch anyway. So yeah, on that. And then the question for Dr. Ruppel, it's kind of a personal question. I was always hesitant to learn Sanskrit because maybe I was influenced by the Bhaja Govindam, where he says at the point of death that rules of grammar are not going to help you. But also, you know, it's a language for liturgical or scholarly purposes. And I think that can be a bit intimidating for your lay practitioner. So I just wanted to know about Sanskrit from the everyday vernacular basis. Already we've heard that Pali and Hindi are great for everyday language, but what about Sanskrit? Is it actually a scholarly language and noble, refined language? If you could expand on that. Thank you.
So Antonia, maybe we'll go over to you first, but then if others, Aleix and Rajiv, want to respond to maybe the broader question about how these languages might go about learning together.
So thank you for those questions. First of all, I'm not Dr. Ruppel, I'm just Antonia. So hi. Yes, absolutely. All three languages are related. Sanskrit is basically the earliest form of them that's attested, and then Pali comes in later, and Hindi comes in after that. So if you start with Sanskrit, Pali is going to be a lot easier. It's going to be easy, basically. It's not going to be nothing. There are still things that you will have to learn, but there will be so many similarities. Hindi, given that it's sort of separated in time, please apologize, my cat wailing in the background. He is loved, he is fed, he just wants my attention. So Hindi and Sanskrit are separated by more time, so the differences between them are greater than between Sanskrit and Pali. But yes, learning Sanskrit is definitely going to help you with Pali and Hindi. If you start out with Pali, then learning Sanskrit is going to be easier. So definitely. As for the other question, while it is absolutely true that Sanskrit is the language of, you know, very august literature, of scripture, of scholarly discourse, and so on. First of all, there's a lot of text. There's lots of stories. There's a lot of literature that is everything other than highbrow. That is, you know, very everyday. That is meant to be entertainment. You know, there are Sanskrit dad jokes, basically. You know, you have everything from the very basic to the you know, near holy, near sanctified. Also, if you're particularly interested in the sort of everyday aspect of Sanskrit, there is a big spoken Sanskrit movement, and we are very excited that we are now also offering a spoken Sanskrit class at Yogic Studies. So if you take a look at the Yogic Studies website, you can see all the details about that. And we recommend, Seth, please disagree with me if I'm saying something wrong, we sort of recommend having about a year's worth of classical Sanskrit introduction before you start with the spoken language introduction. But there definitely is all of that to Sanskrit as well.
Aleix, any thoughts about Sanskrit first, then Pali, or Pali first, then Sanskrit? I will say, to the defense of all of our teachers, they of course want you to take their class, so they're going to say, no, Pali is definitely should be first. But I think they're also very, very humble and honest people. So,
well, I mean, I should say that, but I would be. I mean, I'm an example of the real answer, which is, yeah, it's better to do Sanskrit first. If you for several reasons. First thing is Pali is going to be easier, and then second thing, if you are interested in Buddhist texts, of course, before I said that Sanskrit is the language of Brahmanism, but it is also the language of Buddhism and Jainism and many more things. So Sanskrit is the language of, it's the language, actually, it's the language. So learning Sanskrit is a good idea to start with. If you are interested in the three of them, the Hindi is, I would learn Hindi immediately also. And if you leave Pali for later, honestly. That is, the Buddha teaches to us to be honest, and we have to be honest. That doesn't matter. But if you would be interested in reading Buddhist texts in Pali, this ancient Indian tradition, right away, you could actually take Sanskrit and Pali simultaneously, which is what I did. And you focus a little bit more on the Sanskrit grammar, and then you will understand some things in Pali a little bit better. But yeah, I think there is no problem in that. And most people who start with Sanskrit, then eventually they will come to Pali, because it's a natural kind of, so no problem with that.
But I think either way would be fine, and it really depends on your interests, So if you're really focused more on the Buddhist tradition and Buddhist scriptures, you might want to just dive right in, to the earliest Buddhist teachings. So it might be up to the individual. But Rajiv, I was wondering if you had any thoughts about where Hindi might fit in. I could speak with my own experience, having trained in Sanskrit and some Hindi. The Sanskrit definitely helped for my Hindi, but only to a certain degree, would you say?
Yeah. My answer to that question would be to see what's your goal with the language learning. If it is a goal to have kind of going to India and conversing and surviving and thriving, and then picking up the classicals wherever the cognates are still there. If you know Sanskrit, you would know many Hindi words, as there are lots of cognates and the words, and I can read and understand Sanskrit. I cannot teach because I'm not the scholar, but I think that has to be answered from the person, like, what is my goal here? What do I want to do with the language? And because from my point of view, picking one language will definitely help learning the another, but then what's the goal? And that should be the deciding factor.
Yeah, and as Kate Hartmann was just pointing out in the chat, one thing to think about that is a commonality, but also a difference here between these courses is the script, or the alphabet, right? So for both Hindi and Sanskrit, you will be learning and utilizing what is called the Devanagari script, which is not the only script or alphabet for Sanskrit in particular, but it is the primary one. It is the one featured in the majority of publications. And whether you start with Hindi or Sanskrit, you will have the advantage for the second course. You'll already know that script. So if you start with Hindi, you'll learn Devanagari, and then you come to Sanskrit, and first couple of weeks, you'll have a bit of a breather. You can relax a little bit more because you already know Devanagari, and vice versa if you're coming Sanskrit to Hindi. Aleix, maybe you can say a word about this, but for Pali, you will not need to know the Devanagari script. You're off the hook with having to learn a new alphabet. Knowing the Roman characters and English will be fine, with a couple additional diacritics that are very easy to pick up and learn. But Aleix, do you want to say a word about script and Pali?
Yes, thank you, Seth. That's true. I forgot to mention that we are going to jump into Pali in Roman script, and that's because it has become the international script for Pali. As you know, the tradition is alive in different countries with different writing systems or scripts. The major scripts for Pali are actually the Sinhalese, Burmese, and Thai, and then also the Devanagari, and then there are other local scripts. So what I'm going to do is introduce the students to those scripts, and whoever is interested in practicing one of them or all of them, ideally all of them, then I will help. But it's not a requisite, so it's not necessary. You should not feel afraid of that. But if you are interested in learning traditional scripts, which is always great, I'm going to help.
Wonderful. Okay, there's people raising their hands, waiting patiently. There's some comments. I'm going to take just one question I see here in the chat, and then I'll turn to some folks who have their hands raised. So Natasha asks, is there a forum for Sanskrit 101 students? I got halfway through the course and then had to stop for a few months. Any tips on how I can find support when I return to finish the course? So for all of our courses, there will be a unique online community forum that is specific to that cohort, for that particular course. And this is a huge part of the learning experience and the community that you'll develop along the way, being able to ask questions with your instructor and or teaching assistant that we will provide for the course. And it's for everybody, but especially if you can't make sessions live, or if you fall a little bit behind and you find yourself kind of catching up with the recordings, this community forum is really indispensable and is such a core part actually of the course and the learning experience. So each course will have one, and they'll be very active and very busy, throughout the entire course. And our instructors do a really great job of participating and being an active member of those forums. Just as a follow-up to that, let me mention this, and I think Antonia spoke about this earlier, but I just want to highlight it again as well. In the first week of these language courses, there'll be an opportunity, an invitation for you to form study groups outside of our main classroom hours, especially in Sanskrit, but I hope we can do this for Hindi and Pali as well, because they've proven so valuable. But creating regional study groups, or study groups just based on different time zones or time sessions, have proven to be one of the greatest assets for language learning. And I know there's some folks here who have been in those study groups, and they could even speak to it more than myself, but so many friendships that have come out of those, and a lot of language learning and the cementing of what you've learned in class, I think, can happen in those study groups. So the community forum and the study groups are two really great resources that you'll have at your aid to help you make progress. Okay, let's go to Miguel and then to Sandhya, who I see raising their hands.
Hello, Seth. Hello, everybody. Antonia, Raj, and Aleix. And as a Sanskrit yogic student, after 1 year of taking Antonia's series, which I can highly recommend, of course, after you suffer but you love it, but like now, I'm wanting to continue this experience with the 200 series. But as you said, like at some time, like we want to do everything. So also I want to keep up with the Hindi, because of course my center of interest is yoga, and Sanskrit became like very important to have access to all these texts, as Antonia said. But I also love this spoken part, no? And right now I'm taking spoken Sanskrit with Varun, and it was also like very happy and magical how all these Sanskrit things we learned with Antonia, like they became like sounds, and it's very gratifying. And I would like also, of course, I haven't been in India yet, so I would like to go to India and actually been able to speak with people. And that's why I'm also interested in taking the Hindi class. So like my question is like, I'm planning to take the 200 series simultaneously with the 100 Hindi series, but I'm not sure if that's like a good idea or not. Like I get already used to working every day thanks to Antonia's series. So yes, I would like to know, I don't know if I better should wait before taking Hindi, or maybe I can just go for both of them. Pretty much that's it. Thank you.
Antonia, do you have any thoughts?
Actually, I just got this question from someone else. I don't know whether Aaron, whether you're still here, but who was just asking me about, doing Sanskrit and Hindi at the same time. And I think, obviously it's going to take time. Taking 2 courses at the same time rather than 1 will take more practice time. And I think your Hindi journey is going to be mostly noticing all the ways in which Hindi differs from Sanskrit, whereas all the things where Hindi and Sanskrit are the same, you won't even really notice them consciously. You'll just, they'll just be part of the course. They'll be second nature for you. So yes, of course, it is going to be more work than taking just 1 course, taking, either just Hindi or just Sanskrit. Taking both at the same time will take more time, but I think they would go together very well. That would be my take.
And I will add, Miguel, we are different than a traditional university in the sense that these courses are not necessarily aimed at a degree, or we're not a traditional master's program, although we do offer, as you know, this advanced certificate program. And soon, actually, we will be offering an advanced Sanskrit certificate program. We could say more about that later if folks are interested. It's very exciting. So these courses will be for credits within the Yogic Studies and Buddhist Studies online ecosystems. But my point I was going to make is, if you were at a traditional university and say you were doing a master's program or a PhD program, it would not be uncommon at all for you to be doing 2 or sometimes even 3 languages at the same time, while also doing other graduate coursework. Now, does that mean that this is a wonderful thing to do 5 courses in a single semester? No, these poor graduate students are all suffering immensely. But so it really depends on everything else going on in your life, your other balance with the courses. It's certainly possible to do 2, even 3 of these at the same time, time frames permitted. But you really just have to feel that out for yourself. How much work was required kind of, for the Sanskrit, and how much time you need to put in it to really see the results that you want. But we welcome anyone to try. And if you sign up for a course, any course, and you just feel like this is just too much and you can't do it, we're very understanding and flexible, and we can work something out. Whether it's a deferment or a refund, we can find a solution for your situation. So, don't get in over your head, but if you feel the energy and you're passionate to want to try to do both, then go for it. Why not? Okay, let's go to Sandhya, and then I see Christopher have their hands up.
I am going to ask if I can send specific emails to both the Hindi instructor, Dr. Ranjan, and to Antonia, who insists we call her that. My situation is very unique. I studied Sanskrit in college and a bit in grad school over 20 years ago, and I just kind of feel like I need a refresher. I haven't done any formal translating in a long time. And as a person of North Indian heritage, raised in the United States, I've been reading Devanagari my entire life. And my family's from Rajasthan, so I've been speaking a Hindi dialect mixed with Hindi. We call what I speak khichdi, with a lot of English and Americanisms sprinkled in. But I'm looking towards formalizing my knowledge of Hindi and reawakening my knowledge of Sanskrit, and don't know exactly where along the varieties of courses that are currently on offer and that might be on offer in the future I could or should place myself. And I have an interest not just for my own needs and interests, but you might have seen my 7-year-old interrupt me, but I've got 2 young boys who want to learn a little bit, and I need a refresher so I can teach better. So since time is short, I'd rather I can continue these conversations offline or in another way rather than taking up people's time with really, really specific, unique questions. Thank you.
I thought I'd quickly butt in because I can answer one part of your question very easily. We have a placement exam. So for Sanskrit, if you want to know, should you start with 101? Should you just jump into 102? If you email Kate Burns at Yogic Studies, so info@yogicstudies.com, and say you want to take the placement exam, then I can tell you exactly where you would be, where you would best get started.
Perfect. Thank you.
And I want to add two things. First of all, I'm also not Dr. Ranjan, I'm Rajiv or Raj. And second thing is, like, as your plan with the Hindi is to formalize it, and you already read and everything, but it's not a bad idea to start from the scratch, because this is like a typical experience of America. Like when I teach here at the university, I see many heritage students taking Hindi. And they know already a bit and pieces and here and there, but when they start from the scratch, they have like the solid base, and they know what they know and they know what they don't know. And the future plan is to kind of transfer this knowledge to the kids and someone else. It will give a kind of a where it starts from and how it leads and how it progresses. So that's not a bad idea to kind of. And then, because you will be taking both courses at the same time, you might think, okay, this much I know, so let's focus on the Sanskrit side of something. Then, then it's kind of complement each other, not necessarily like two other stream. And even if you are learning, let's say, advanced Hindi or like moving on faster, then it will help in vocabulary with the Sanskrit, and the Sanskrit will kind of complement the Hindi vocabulary. That said, Hindi also uses lots of Persian and Arabic vocabulary, and English chutneyfied, as you use the word khichdi. I call chutneyfied Hindi and chutneyfied English that we. So it's not, I mean, for you, I believe, as you individually, as a heritage who has spoken and, know a little bit of Hindi, to formalize it, start from the scratch, and then it will keep adding more confidence and more kind of instructional kind of ability too.
Okay, thank you.
And Sandhya, let me also just add, as a parent of two young children, children are welcome in class. You might have to hit that mute button, but if they want to study along with you, if
the 12-year-old wants to study Hindi so intensely.
Yeah, bring them aboard. I think, Antonia, we had, I believe it was a 13-year-old who was
a 9-year-old.
Was it a 9-year-old? So we have had some children take Sanskrit with us before, and that's a wonderful thing, to be able to do that. And another positive thing of it being online, not at the traditional university, opening up that access for all ages, all learners. So. If what we say is, because we often find ourselves in this situation where spouses or partners or family members or even pets want to take the course, that's fine. But if you want a certificate with us, they have to be individually registered. It's just what we say. But if the whole family wants to sit around the Zoom room and listen to Rajiv or Antonia's lectures, wow, then that's what a beautiful family that is, to be able to do that. Okay.
All right. Well, thank you. To Rajiv, go Hawkeye. I live in Iowa.
Okay, let's go to Christopher, and then there's some more questions I see in the chat that I will also bring up.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, welcome.
Okay, great. Thank you. Questions kind of in line, and I'm just going to extend from what some other folks have asked. I'm interested in both Sanskrit and Pali. My thinking was, I'm a Latin geek, so I did 4.5 years of Latin. My thinking was what would make the most sense would be Sanskrit first, then Pali, kind of like Latin first, then then French or Italian. So the question one, I think the answer is yes, but is that a good kind of programmatic approach? And if so, what would the recommendation be on when to start the Pali vis-a-vis the Sanskrit? Will you be offering the Pali course this time next year, would running the 200 level Sanskrit and 100 level Pali at the same time make sense? That's pretty much it.
Yeah, I think, well, welcome, Christopher. Great to have you. I think you kind of answered your own questions there. I think that does probably make sense programmatically in your case, maybe to start with the Sanskrit. We'll have to see how the first year of Pali does this year, but we hope we can have Aleix join us again and that we could offer this again next year. The plan certainly is to do so. But of course, with all these things, we have to see how it goes and to make sure that it's financially feasible for everyone, to make sure that we can do so. But I feel very positive and confident that we will. And honestly, we really hope so. Like, we want to be able to create these programs to be an online center where we can continually offer this and really be a go-to place for this kind of language training now and moving forward. So we hope so.
And just very quickly, I apologize, I should know this, but you have 200 and 300 level Sanskrit offerings down the road as well?
We certainly do. So we all currently, we already have 200 level. In fact, well, where are we at in that right now? My head gets jumbled. Antonia, save me.
So 200, the first class that did 200 level just finished a few weeks ago. It was difficult to say goodbye because we became fairly good friends, particularly towards the end. And so, 100 and 200 level is basically with me, but the 300 level classes that are already scheduled, they will be basically with people whose research focuses exactly on the texts that they're teaching for yogic studies, or focuses on exactly that, that genre. So they're basically taught by, calling them world experts is almost an understatement. So 100 level, 200 level is with me. So 1 year of grammar, 1 year of working on your fluency, and then the 300. And Seth, I don't know whether we will have 400 level Sanskrit texts, but those will basically be focusing on specific texts with people whose life's work is working on those texts.
Yeah, so 201 is readings of the Bhagavad Gita with Antonia. 202 is the Ramayana. 203 will rotate depending on Antonia's fancies, but previously we read Sanskrit narrative literature. This next term for 203 will be reading Dharma Shastras. 301, our first advanced level Sanskrit, is actually going to be opening up for enrollment just in the next couple of weeks. 301 is going to be the Patanjali Yoga Shastra, that is to say the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali with their Bhashya or auto commentary. And that's going to be taught by Dr. Philip Moss, who is, again, the world expert on the Patanjali Yoga Shastra. 302 will be then taught by Varun Khanna, who is currently teaching spoken Sanskrit and also taught an Upanishads course for us. 302 is going to be a deep dive into Panini and the Ashtadhyayi, so classical Sanskrit grammar with a capital P for Panini. So that will be 302. And then 303, we've actually just confirmed, is going to be Vedic Sanskrit with Dr. Kaylee Smith, a colleague of mine from Harvard, who Kate also knows. So yes, so in answer to your question, Christopher, we now have kind of a continually running or rotating series of 100 level and 200 level courses that will open up once a year. And the 300 level courses will continue to evolve, and we'll have 304 and 305 and 306, and each one will be focused on a different text, a different genre. So we'll, in fact, we can actually announce we have another one that will be coming up, taught by Antonia, yours truly. What is that course going to be, Antonia? Well, I'll tell her before. It's going to be on Kavya, on Sanskrit poetry. reading Kalidasa.
So yes, so reading the Meghaduta.
Because we decided we cannot run a Sanskrit program online and not read Kalidasa. It just would not be right. Now, someone was asking, I had mentioned before that we will be introducing a Sanskrit certificate studies program. If you're familiar with our Yogic Studies Advanced Certificate program, it will be modeled very similarly in that style, but basically all of the Sanskrit courses at Yogic Studies will count for credit towards this larger learning goal. And there will be a core curriculum of required courses, including the 100 and 200 level series with Antonia. You'll then have the option to select a number of different electives at the 300 level, electives including spoken Sanskrit. We may include courses in the future on Sanskrit chanting, which has been highly requested as another elective. But at the end, the culmination of the Sanskrit certificate program would be a graduate seminar with Antonia Ruppel, and you would work together with her and a small cohort to produce your own Sanskrit translation or to do some sort of final Sanskrit project of your choosing.
And I've actually been saying, you know, translation would be, so there should be a final project that should be your own initiative. You should come up with a project that you define, that we then talk about, and that you then, you know, go and work on. And a translation would be sort of the classical option for this kind of project. Yeah. But basically, I want it to be as you know, I want the definition for that final project to be as broad as possible. So anything that is Sanskrit related, anything that allows you to go off and learn more about a Sanskrit related subject will be fair game.
Yeah.
So if you'd like to, you know, stage a little Sanskrit play, if you'd like to do some translation, if you'd like to do some research into some aspect of Sanskrit or Sanskrit literature, I would love to help.
I was going to say, if you want to write the next great Sanskrit screenplay, that could be your final project, which is what the world has been waiting for.
Or translate Beowulf into Sanskrit.
There we go.
Oh my, yes, please.
Very quickly, do you anticipate a 200-300 level series for the Pali potentially? Or is that just looking too far ahead?
It's possible. Kate, do you have any thoughts? I see your hand up. Do you want to answer that?
Yeah, so I'll just answer that quickly. One pitch that I will make for Pali is that you will go from 0 to reading Pali more quickly than you will go from 0 to reading Sanskrit texts in primary source literature. And that's partly because of the nature of the Sutta literature that Aleix is going to focus on. And so in a certain way, you know, a 300 level would be really advanced, maybe reading texts from outside the Buddhist canon or getting really into grammar. So there could be a 200 level, but by the end of the 100 level series, you'll actually be able to read pretty much everything in the Pali canon. Not necessarily immediately, not necessarily without consulting your grammar or your dictionary, but the nature of Pali is such that you kind of are able to do that more quickly. Whereas Sanskrit, reading Kavya is so different from reading the Ramayana, which is so different from reading Panini, that you can spend your whole life learning Sanskrit and still feel very much that there's much more to learn. You know, so depending on what your interests are, what your goal is for learning languages, those are sort of the features of these different languages. We'd love to, of course, in the future, offer more specific Pali reading courses. So maybe, let's say we do a Milinda Panya course with an optional section to read the Pali of that. You know, that's potentially the case, but it's in the future, so I don't want to make any guarantees or promises that I can't keep up.
I was going to say the same, though, Kate. I could see us doing 200 level Pali courses, which would be readings in particular texts as a way to continue. Because yeah, if you've done a whole year of study, you want to have a place to be able to continue to use it, because if you don't use it, you will lose it with this language stuff. So I could see us continuing to do that. It'll depend on Aleix, and it will depend, of course, on the thirst and the hunger of the Pali students at Buddhist Studies Online. So if everyone continues to ask for that, then surely we'll be able to.
We also did have someone in the chat asking about classical Chinese too. So one of the nice things about Buddhism is there's so many languages that you can read scriptures in. That is also one of the difficulties. There's so many languages. But I also wanted to bring up a question that was in the chat that I think perhaps got a little bit buried, but since it's a practical question directly to our instructors, I wanted to make sure to ask it. And maybe I'll start with Antonia. Like, how many hours do you think per week someone would need to set aside to do the class? And feel free to say that it's a range, but just give us a sense of the range, and maybe Rajiv and Aleix, if you could speak to, how many hours should someone maybe expect to have to put into a course like this to keep up? Thanks.
So there's the 2 live sessions, which add up to 3 hours, so 2 times 90 minutes. For the Sanskrit, you get materials, you get links to all the materials for the week sent out every Friday, so for the coming week. And over the weekend, I would probably expect to spend, say, 2 to 3 hours in total. There's always going to be a video on the upcoming material, and the video is going to be anywhere between half an hour and an hour long. So there's that. And then every week there will be something to memorize, which, depending on you, depending on how used you are to memorization, will take you anywhere between, I would say, 1 to 2 hours. And then there's the written homework, which will also take you between 1 to 2 hours. So I would say, 3 hours for the classes, an hour for the video, plus, let's say, maximum 4 hours for memorization and written work. So I'd say about 7 hours per week, I think, is probably realistic. But it really, as Kate says, it's a range, because it depends on you. If you've been learning languages all your life, then doing vocab work is going to be no problem at all. If this is the first time you're learning, especially a classical language, then especially in the beginning, it is going to take you longer to get into that kind of work. It's going to get better over the duration of the course, but especially in the beginning, you'll need a little more.
I would add that when I was planning part of the 3 sessions, like 101, 102, 103, keep in mind that we're also doing online courses, not in face-to-face. So I kept it like, if you come to the live session, so that's hour and a half twice a week, that makes it 3 hours. And for Hindi specifically, if you keep 3 hours aside, so somewhere, and then that 3 hours, other than watching, or attending the live session, and that 3 hours would be like doing your homework or preparing for the class. So another 3 hours, like 1.5 hours for preparing for the class, because the way I set this up in my planning is that you come with the preparation a little bit, at least watch the video. And my experience is that if I make a video more than, let's say, 7 minutes, more than 7 minutes long video, students or the listeners or the audience start sleeping. So I make the video quick videos, like 5 minutes, 7 minutes videos that you can rewatch it and can kind of separate them. But for Hindi, from my honest opinion, and this has lots of variable: who is the student, how fast that person, what's the learning skill, what's the learning style. But considering all this, if you come attend the live session and 3 hours more, 1.5 for preparation and 1.5 for doing the homework, because I'm not going to overburden everybody with the homework, but preparation is important, and then you learn something and spend some time. Or you can just, put the headphone and listen to some Bollywood music, then you are doing Hindi. So that's the part of learning.
Great. Vishal, I see your hand is raised, is it to ask the question that you popped into the chat here?
Yeah, but I think so what I'm trying, you mentioned, for instance, later on as we evolve, that, for instance, Dr. Mas is doing the Yoga Shastra. That's obviously for this year. So, it's up in the air whether in later years he would be able to do. So would that, for instance, be available as a recorder that we could purchase later? Or is it, no, that's something you would do live at the time? I just wasn't, there wasn't clarity on that, if you could.
Yeah, that's a great question, and it wasn't clarity for me up until a couple of days ago, actually, Vishal, about how to best do that. But we did just decide, so I can share with you. So for this will apply to Hindi, Pali, Sanskrit. For the 100 and 200 level courses, we have an enrollment period. And we encourage everybody who's ready to join us to sign up. And then sometime after the course will go live, maybe a few weeks in, we will close enrollment, which is different than our other yogic studies and Buddhist studies online courses, where we do leave enrollment open in a kind of evergreen model where you can jump in anytime and watch the recordings. The reason we do this closed model for the language learning is really to create these cohorts. And because we have a large number of students signing up to really help administratively for us to manage and guide those students during that year of study, logistically, it's just, if everybody is doing it asynchronously at their own time, it gets too messy for us. But also for the benefit of the students, to keep you on track, right? To keep you on the schedule, to keep you moving through as best as we can. We know things will happen. Think life might get in the way. You might need to step away and come back. If you're in, and you will have the recordings, okay? But we do close enrollment to encourage everybody, and we really, want you to try to commit to do it in this time frame as best as you can for your own benefit. Because look, otherwise you can buy the textbook, you can watch videos on YouTube, you can go and try to learn these languages on your own. It's really hard to do it on your own. We really do need timelines, we need deadlines, we need a community, we need a structure of support to really guide us and keep us on track. And so for the 100 and 200 level, Vishal and everyone, there's an open enrollment period, and then that will close once the course is going. But for Sanskrit, for 300 level courses like Patanjali Yoga Shastra with Dr. Mas, because I don't know if he's going to be able to offer that every year, and probably not, we will leave enrollment open for those. And because the nature of that course will be more of we're going to just read the text together in Sanskrit. Yes, we're going to break down and go over the grammar, but it's less of a how to learn the language, from ground zero with grammatical lessons and so forth, and more just reinforcing your grammar through actual reading. It lends itself more to a self-study model. So, long way of saying, yes, the 300 levels, we will leave enrollment open, but we will try when we can to run those live again in the future. So I do hope we will be able to get Philomas to come back and do another live version of the Patanjali Yoga Shastra, that course in particular, because I think it's such an important text for our platform and for our community. I know many people have to leave now, possibly even our instructors who have been here for a very long time, and we thank them. Do we have a few more minutes to take another question or two? Those in the audience, if you need to leave, of course you can, and this recording will be posted. Christopher, do you have your hand up again, or was that from before?
I think that's before, sorry.
That's okay, okay. Kate, or anyone, did I miss anything in the chat that may have come in?
Nope, we've been pretty good about staying on time. And it's also worth saying to everyone, if you do have questions, right, that aren't occurring to you now, you can feel free to email us at info@yogicstudies.com or info@buddhiststudiesonline.com, and we will address all questions there if you didn't get to it in this time.
Yeah.
So if I could perhaps just answer directly a question that I just got directed towards me and in the chat, but that I think is something that will be a concern to many people. So I know I put a lot of pressure on myself to learn and do my best. I don't want to fail the Sanskrit program, and I don't want to burn myself out and then hate Sanskrit, is the message. And I just wanted to say that, that is a very, very, very common issue. So many people come and have, a lot of energy, and then maybe want to do everything perfect, want to do everything really, really well. And the thing with especially the first year, maybe, with Hindi and Pali, it would be slightly different, but in Sanskrit, definitely perfection is not what you should aim for. I will always tell you, this is the stuff that you need to know in order to be able to go on. And then this is the stuff that you should, if you have time, if you have extra brain space, if you have extra energy, you should then, maybe also memorize. But if you don't, no worries, you'll be able to go on. And this is then the thing that you will pick up and that will become part of your active memory when we get to year 2 and we basically practice and just apply the knowledge from the first year. So the first year is going to be not about perfect mastery of Sanskrit grammar. It's about familiarity, about understanding the basic concepts and getting to know actively to know the most frequent forms, endings, and so on. But really, I would never expect anybody to, reach actual complete mastery of all those forms unless they've already, until after they've had the chance to read a lot of Sanskrit, to apply their knowledge and so on. And so that is something, in case anybody is wondering, in case if anybody is worried about taking on, too much, this is my approach towards that fear, because I used to be a perfectionist, and then I slowly trained myself out of it.
And let me just add this comment from Miguel, who's here. Miguel just finished his first year of Sanskrit. He survived with Antonia. He says, I have no linguistic background. So for me, the first 2 terms, Sanskrit 101 and 102, were pretty challenging. The difficult part was to establish a daily rhythm. And he suggests that anywhere between 1 and 2 hours a day, depending on your level, will really help. I will also add, if you are going to learn Sanskrit or Hindi, if you've already signed up or you're thinking about it, you have some time now, between now and May 23rd, the start of the term. The best thing that you can be doing right now to prepare is really to start learning the script, the alphabet. And that can be as simple as getting the textbook or looking online at some resources and making flashcards and just taking a few times throughout your day, just 5-10 minutes, but a few times throughout the day, and just hit through those flashcards. There's only 50 or so characters you need to know. It's actually not that bad. It's a little scary at first, but it's also a lot of fun. But we also have, at Yogic Studies, we have a special seminar that I taught actually at the beginning of the pandemic, which feels like ages ago now. That was called the Devanagari Seminar. And it was a Devanagari boot camp. So 6 weeks, 6 modules of just learning the script in a really fun way. It was aimed at Sanskrit learners, but it would be really useful and apply for both Sanskrit and Hindi learners. Again, for Pali, you won't need it. You can just jump right in and you'll be reading the Pali Canon, I think, on week 1. But if you are going to do Sanskrit or Hindi, in the first few weeks or month, one thing that students report and commonly can feel a little hung up with is having to learn the script. So do yourself a favor and get some resources or take the seminar. For students who sign up for Sanskrit 101 or Hindi 101, we offer you a reduced rate on that Devanagari seminar. So it's waiting for you on the thank you page when you sign up for Sanskrit 101 or Hindi 101. So that's an option that's available for you. And I think a lot of students who have taken that did feel a little bit more prepared on day 1 of Sanskrit. Okay, I think we're going to leave it there for now. Again, as Kate mentioned, please don't be a stranger. Reach out to us with further questions or comments, concerns. info@yogicstudies.com and info@buddhiststudiesonline.com. You can also reach out on social media through a direct message on Instagram if you like. But I want to thank all of our teachers for their time today. Thank Kate Hartmann for her time, and to thank all of you for showing up and for your curiosity and your enthusiasm, your interest in studying these languages. Just to see you all here is really reassuring and inspiring for us. So I think I speak for all of the teachers when we say we hope to see you in class very soon, and to get to know some of you more through this language learning journey. Of course, we do know and see many return students here as well, so we hope you will continue. And I think that's it. Any final words from any of our other presenters? I think we can all unmute and say goodbye in whatever language you like.
Goodbye.
Thank you.
Which is fine, or just feel free to unmute and
Thank you
on your way out here.
Thank you everyone for coming.
Gracias, hasta pronto.
Thank you.
Dhanyawada,
Good enough.
everyone. Thank you so much.
Bye.
All right. Thanks you guys so much. That was great.
Thank you, Seth.
All right.
Thank you, Seth and Kate.
Good night, everyone. Bye-bye.